Welcome back to Boring Sleepy History Stories. Tonight we travel thousands of years into the past, to the banks of the Nile, home to pyramids, mighty pharaohs, and gods believed to watch over every moment of life. But beyond the golden masks and towering temples, daily life in ancient Egypt was far harsher than the legends suggest. So imagine spending just one day as an ordinary Egyptian, where survival under the blazing sun was only the beginning of your struggles. Before we begin, if you enjoy relaxing history sleep stories, take a second to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing this little community of sleepy historians from all around the world. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin tonight's journey. In the earliest hours before dawn, the banks of the Nile are shrouded in a heavy, silent darkness. The reed hut, woven from river grasses and patched with mud, offers little protection from the world outside. Inside, a young farmer named Menes stirs on his straw mat, the linen sheet tangled around his legs. The air is already thick and warm, promising another day of relentless heat. Menes blinks, his eyes adjusting to the faint glow that seeps through the gaps in the walls. He listens to the distant calls of ibis and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. A brief moment of peace before the sun rises. As the first rays break over the horizon, the hut is flooded with golden light. The sun, revered as Ra, is both a blessing and a curse. Menes feels its power immediately, the warmth intensifying with every passing minute. There are no curtains to shield him, no cool stone floors, only the scratchy mat beneath him and the promise of a sweltering day ahead. He sits up, stretching his aching limbs, and glances at his family. His wife, Nefret, is already awake, quietly preparing a small bundle of bread for breakfast. Their two children, still asleep, clutch each other for comfort. Men steps outside, greeted by the vast expanse of desert and the distant silhouette of pyramids. The village is coming to life. Neighbours emerge from their huts, faces weary but determined. The Nile glistens in the morning light, its surface broken by the occasional splash of fish or the slow drift of a funeral boat. Menes knows the river is both life-giver and threat. Today, he must fetch water before the sun climbs higher and the banks become crowded. He walks barefoot across the hot sand, each step reminding him of the harshness of this land. The ground is already warm, and by midday it will be unbearable. Menes passes other villagers, exchanging brief nods. There is little time for conversation. Survival is the priority. At the river's edge, he fills clay jars, balancing them carefully on his shoulders. The water is murky, carrying the scent of fish and decay, but it is all they have. Returning home, Menes helps Nefret prepare their simple meal. The bread is dense and gritty, baked in a communal oven that stands at the centre of the village. Sand has found its way into every bite, a constant reminder of their environment. The children wake, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and join their parents. They eat in silence, savouring the meagre food and the brief respite before work begins. As the sun climbs higher, Menes joins the other farmers in the fields. The overseer, a stern man with a whip at his side, watches their every move. Menes plunges his hands into the muddy earth, planting barley and pulling weeds. Sweat pours down his face, mixing with dust and sand. The work is grueling, but necessary. Nefret, meanwhile, grinds grain and weaves linen, her hands raw from labour. Throughout the day, Menes thinks of the stories told by elders, of gods who watch from above, of pharaohs who rule with divine authority. He wonders if Ra feels their suffering, if the sun's heat is a test of faith. The pyramids loom in the distance, symbols of power and eternity, but for Menes they are reminders of the endless toil required to survive. As evening falls, the village gathers by the river. Children play in the fading light, their laughter echoing across the water. Menes sits with Nefret, sharing stories and dreams of a better life. The stars emerge, and for a moment, the harshness of the day is forgotten. In ancient Egypt, every sunrise is a challenge, every sunset a small victory. Menes knows tomorrow will bring the same struggles, but for now he is grateful for the peace that night brings. Menes awoke the next morning to the same relentless sun, its rays already piercing the thin walls of his reed hut. The heat was a constant companion, but today the Nile called with a different urgency. The family's water jars were nearly empty, and the dust clung to their skin, making every movement uncomfortable. Nefret, his wife, gathered their worn linen garments, and together with their children, they prepared for the daily ritual of bathing and collecting water. The walk to the river was a procession of villagers, each carrying jars, baskets, or bundles of laundry. The Nile, shimmering in the morning light, was both a source of life and a lurking danger. Menes watched as the children ran ahead, their laughter mingling with the croaks of frogs and the buzzing of flies. The river bank was alive with activity. Families washing, livestock drinking, and the occasional ibis pecking at the mud. Men set down his jars and glanced at the water, its surface broken by the slow drift of a crocodile. He remembered the stories told by elders, warnings of creatures that lurked beneath, waiting for an unwary bather. Still, the need for cleanliness and water outweighed the fear. Nefret knelt at the edge, scooping water into a clay basin. She handed Menes a handful of coarse sand, the ancient substitute for soap. He rubbed it over his arms and legs, wincing as it scraped away the grime but left his skin raw. Nearby, other villagers performed the same ritual, their bodies glistening with sweat and river water. Some smeared mud on their faces and arms, hoping to shield themselves from the sun's fury. A few, more desperate, used crocodile dung, believing it offered protection from burns. The air was thick with the scent of earth, water, and the faint tang of decay. Menes watched as Nefret washed their children, her hands gentle but firm, scrubbing away the dust and sweat of yesterday. The laundry was another ordeal. Nefret and the other women pounded linen against smooth stones, the rhythmic thud echoing across the riverbank. Menes joined in, his muscles straining as he wrung out the cloth, careful to keep an eye on the water's edge. The river was unpredictable, sometimes calm, sometimes treacherous. He saw a neighbour leap back as a crocodile surfaced nearby, its eyes glinting in the sunlight. Despite the dangers, the Nile was a place of community. Menes exchanged greetings with neighbours, shared news of the harvest, and listened to the laughter of children splashing in the shallows. The river was sacred, its waters believed to carry the blessings of the gods. Yet, it was also a source of anxiety. Sewage from upstream drifted past, and Menes worried about the unseen threats, parasites, leeches, and illness. Once the bathing and laundry were done, Menes filled the water jars, balancing them on his shoulders for the walk home. The sun was higher now, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight. Nefret carried the clean linen, her face flushed but determined. The children skipped ahead, their skin shining from the river's embrace. Back at the hut, Menes set the jars in the shade and helped Nefret hang the linen to dry. The family felt refreshed, if only for a moment. The Nile had cleansed them, but its dangers lingered in their minds. Menace knew that tomorrow would bring the same ritual, the same risks, and the same reliance on the river's unpredictable mercy. In ancient Egypt, survival was a daily negotiation with nature, community, and the gods who watched from above. The sun had barely reached its peak when Menace and his family returned from the Nile, their skin tingling from the coarse sand and cool water. The clean linen fluttered in the breeze, and the children, now refreshed, settled onto the straw mat inside the hut. Nefret began to prepare their morning meal, a ritual as old as the river itself. The scent of baking bread drifted from the communal oven at the heart of the village, mingling with the earthy aroma of mud brick and the distant tang of the Nile. Men's watched as Nefret measured out the precious emmer wheat, her hands practiced and steady. The grain was coarse, ground between heavy stones that left behind flecks of sand, a daily, gritty addition to their diet. She mixed the flour with water from the Nile, kneading the dough with care. Their eldest, little Hapu, helped by shaping small loaves, his fingers sticky with dough. The bread was their staple, dense and filling, though never soft or delicate. Men's remembered stories of feasts in the pharaoh's palace, tables laden with honey cakes and roasted meats, but such luxuries were far from their reality. While the bread baked in the clay oven, Menes fetched a jug of beer, cloudy and thick, brewed from barley and flavoured with dates. It was not the sweet drink of celebration, but a necessity, safer than the river water and nourishing in its own way. Even the children drank it, their bodies accustomed to its mild bitterness. Menes poured the beer into simple clay cups, passing them around as Nefret sliced the bread. They ate together, seated on low stools or squatting on the cool earth. The bread was chewy, sometimes so tough that Menes worried for his teeth. He bit into a slice and felt the familiar crunch of sand, a reminder of the grinding stones in the ever-present desert. Nefret smiled, brushing crumbs from Hapu's face, and offered a small bowl of dried figs, an occasional treat, gathered from the edge of the fields. Conversation was sparse, focused on the day ahead. Menes planned to join the other farmers in the barley fields, while Nefret would weave linen and tend to the children. The meal was not a celebration, but a tactical refueling, each bite a step toward surviving another day. Menes glanced at the communal oven, where rats sometimes scurried, drawn by the warmth and the promise of crumbs. He remembered the warnings to check each loaf for signs of gnawing, but hunger often outweighed caution. After breakfast, Menes gathered his tools, a wooden hoe, a basket for weeds, and a worn linen tunic. The sun was already fierce, and he wrapped a cloth around his head, hoping for some relief. Nefret cleaned the bowls and swept the hut, her movements efficient and practiced. The children played quietly, stacking bits of broken pottery and chasing a stray beetle across the floor. As Menes stepped outside, he saw neighbours finishing their own meals, faces set with determination. The village was alive with purpose, each family bound by the same routines and the same hopes. Menes joined the procession to the fields, the air thick with dust and the distant hum of insects. The bread and beer gave him strength, but he knew it would not last. By midday, hunger would return, and the cycle would begin again. In ancient Egypt, breakfast was not a feast but a necessity, a moment of brief comfort before the day's labour. Menes understood this, accepting the grit and the grind as part of life. He looked back at his family, grateful for their resilience, and stepped into the sun. ready to face whatever challenges the day would bring. The morning meal finished, Menace wiped the last crumbs of gritty bread from his lips and rose from the mat. The sun, now high and merciless, cast long shadows across the village. The air shimmered with heat, and the promise of a grueling day hung heavy. Menace glanced at his wife, Nefret, who was already gathering her weaving tools, and at his children, who busied themselves with chores. The rhythm of life in ancient Egypt was dictated by the sun, the land, and the endless cycle of labour. Men joined the procession of villagers heading toward the fields. The barley and emmer wheat stretched in neat rows, their green stalks a rare relief against the endless brown of sand and mud brick. The overseer, a stern man named Paiser, stood at the edge of the field, his whip coiled at his side, a silent reminder of the consequences of idleness. Menes nodded respectfully, gripping his wooden hoe, and began the day's work. The labour was relentless. Menes plunged his hands into the earth, pulling weeds and turning soil. The sun beat down, sweat pouring from his brow and soaking his linen tunic, which clung to his skin like a second layer. The ground was hard, cracked from weeks without rain, and every swing of the hoe sent up clouds of dust. Around him, other farmers worked in silence, their faces set in grim determination. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of tools and the distant calls of birds. Nefret, meanwhile, joined the women at the edge of the fields. She carried a basket of flax and a spindle, her fingers nimble as she twisted fibres into thread. The women chatted quietly, sharing news of births, marriages, and the latest gossip from the temple. Their laughter was a brief respite from the monotony of work. Nefret's hands moved quickly, weaving linen for tunics and shrouds, her mind drifting to thoughts of her children and the hope for a better harvest. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became unbearable. Menes paused to drink from a clay jar, the water warm and tasting faintly of river mud. He wiped his brow and looked toward the distant pyramids, their massive forms shimmering in the haze. He wondered about the labourers who built them, their lives spent hauling stones and carving hieroglyphs. His own toil seemed small in comparison, yet just as vital to the survival of his family. The overseer paced the rows, barking orders and urging the workers to move faster. Menes felt the sting of exhaustion in his muscles, but he pressed on, knowing that every stalk of barley meant food for his children. The sun was both enemy and ally. Its heat ripened the crops but threatened to scorch them if the rains did not come soon. By midday, the fields were alive with activity. Children brought water to their parents, dodging the overseer's watchful eye. Nefret and the women gathered under a patch of shade, sharing bread and figs. Menes joined them briefly, grateful for the coolness and the company. They spoke of the gods, of Ra's power and the hope for mercy. The conversation was brief. The work called them back. As the day waned, Menes felt the ache in his back and the grit in his teeth. The fields were a place of hardship, but also of community. The villagers worked together, sharing burdens and small joys. Menes returned home at sunset, his body weary but his spirit unbroken. Nefret greeted him with a smile, and the children ran to embrace him. The family gathered for their evening meal, grateful for the fruits of their labour. In ancient Egypt, life was a cycle of work and rest, of hope and endurance. Menes understood that each day was a test, but also a gift. As the stars appeared over the Nile, he closed his eyes and dreamed of rain, of harvest, and of a future shaped by the strength of those who laboured beneath the sun. The sun had begun its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields as Menes and his fellow labourers finished their day's work. The heat lingered, but the promise of evening brought a measure of relief. Menes wiped the sweat from his brow and gathered his tools, his muscles aching from hours of toil. He glanced at the distant pyramids, their silhouettes stark against the sky, a constant reminder of the power that ruled over every aspect of their lives. As he walked back toward the village, Menes's thoughts turned to the pharaoh, the living god who governed the land. Stories of the pharaoh's divine authority were woven into every part of daily life. Menes remembered the tales told by elders around the fire. The pharaoh was Horus in human form, the son of Ra, chosen to maintain Ma'at, the sacred balance of the universe. To question the pharaoh was to invite disaster, not just for oneself but for the entire community. That evening the village gathered in the central square for a ritual honouring the gods and the pharaoh. Priests in linen robes chanted prayers, their voices rising and falling like the wind over the Nile. Incense drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of earth and sweat. Menes stood with his family, bowing his head as the priests invoked Ra's blessing and the pharaoh's protection. The ceremony was both a comfort and a warning. Loyalty was demanded, and any hint of rebellion would be crushed. After the ritual, Menes watched as a scribe unfurled a papyrus scroll, reading aloud the latest decree from the palace. Taxes would increase this season, the pharaoh's armies needed supplies, and every family was expected to contribute grain and labour. Menes felt a pang of anxiety. His harvest had been meagre, and the thought of giving more to the state weighed heavily on his mind. Yet, he knew there was no choice. The pharaoh's word was law, and to defy it was unthinkable. Nefret squeezed his hand, sensing his worry. She whispered words of encouragement, reminding him that their ancestors had survived worse. Menes nodded, drawing strength from her resilience. Together they returned to their hut, the children trailing behind, sleepy from the day's exertion. Inside, Menes reflected on the power that shaped their world. The pharaoh's image was everywhere, carved into statues, painted on temple walls, stamped onto coins. Even the simplest objects bore the mark of royal authority. Menes remembered seeing soldiers march through the village, their armour gleaming, their faces stern. The presence of the state was constant, a force that demanded obedience and offered protection in return. As night fell, Menes listened to the distant sounds of the temple drums, their rhythm echoing across the fields. He wondered about the lives of those who served in the palace, priests, scribes, and artisans who lived closer to the centre of power. Did they feel the same fear and uncertainty? Or did the pharaoh's favour shield them from the hardships faced by common folk? Menes drifted into sleep, his dreams filled with visions of gods and kings, of pyramids rising toward the heavens. He understood that his life was shaped by forces beyond his control, but he also knew the strength of community and family. In ancient Egypt, survival depended on humility, faith, and an unwavering respect for the divine order. The pharaoh watched over them all, a living symbol of the god's will and the fragile balance that held their world together. Menes awoke before dawn, the air inside the reed hut heavy and still. He stretched, feeling the familiar ache in his limbs, and listened to the faint rustle of sand against the walls. The previous night's ritual and the pharaoh's decree weighed on his mind, but today a more immediate adversary awaited him. the sand itself. Sand was everywhere. It crept into the hut through the smallest cracks, settled in the folds of linen, and coated the floor in a fine, gritty layer. Menace brushed his sleeping mat, but the grains clung stubbornly to the straw. He shook out his tunic, sending a small cloud of dust swirling in the dim light. Nefret, already awake, swept the corners of the hut, her movements practiced but futile. No matter how often she cleaned, the sand always returned. Outside, the village was coming to life. Menes stepped into the morning, his bare feet sinking into the cool, powdery earth. The sun had not yet risen, but the sand already radiated the heat it had stored from the previous day. He watched as neighbours emerged, each battling their own sandy burdens. Children coughed as they played, their laughter punctuated by sneezes. Women shook out baskets and blankets, sending plumes of dust into the air. Men joined the other farmers, heading toward the fields. The path was uneven, littered with stones and patches of loose sand. With every step, grains worked their way between his toes, abrading the skin. He remembered the elders' warnings. Sand wears down everything. Tools, homes, even people. His own sandals, woven from reeds, were thin and frayed, offering little protection. By midday his feet would be raw, his skin scratched and sore. In the fields the sand was a constant adversary. It blew in with the wind, covering young barley shoots and choking the roots. Menes and his companions worked quickly, brushing away the worst of it, but the battle was endless. The overseer barked orders, urging them to keep pace. Menes wiped sweat from his brow, only to feel the grit of sand on his skin. It mixed with the dust, forming a paste that clung to his arms and face. Nefret, too, fought her own war against the sand. As she wove linen, grains worked their way into the fibres, making the cloth rough and uncomfortable. She paused often to shake out her spindle, her hands red and chapped. The children, tasked with fetching water, returned with jars coated in dust. Even their food was not spared. Every bite of bread carried the crunch of sand, a reminder of the land's relentless presence. By afternoon, a windstorm swept through the village. Menes hurried to secure the hut, pressing mats against the walls and covering the entrance with a heavy cloth. The sky darkened as sand whipped through the air, stinging eyes and skin. The family huddled together, listening to the howl of the wind and the steady patter of grains against the roof. When the storm passed, everything was coated in a fresh layer of dust. As evening fell, Menes sat outside, his feet soaking in a basin of cool water. He examined his hands, calloused, cracked, and stained with earth. The sand had worn him down, but he endured. Around him, the village settled into the quiet of night, each family nursing their own wounds. Menes looked toward the pyramids, their ancient stones weathered but unbroken. He drew strength from their endurance, knowing that, like them, he must withstand the sand's assault day after day. In ancient Egypt, sand was more than a nuisance. It was an enemy, a force that shaped every aspect of life. Menes understood that survival meant persistence, resilience, and the ability to find comfort in small victories. As the stars emerged, he closed his eyes, grateful for the brief peace, and prepared to face the sand again with the coming dawn. The sandstorm had passed, leaving the village blanketed in a fine layer of dust. Menes rose early, shaking the grit from his mat and stretching his weary limbs. The air was cooler, but the promise of another scorching day lingered. As he stepped outside, he saw neighbors sweeping their doorways, children chasing each other through clouds of sand, and women preparing offerings for the morning rituals. Today was a festival day, and the rhythm of life shifted from toil to worship. Religion was the heartbeat of Menes's world. Every action, from planting barley to weaving linen, was guided by the will of the gods. The village temple, a modest structure of mud brick and painted wood, stood at the center of the community. Its walls were adorned with images of Ra, Isis, Osiris, and a host of lesser deities, each watching over a different aspect of life. Menes believed the gods were everywhere, in the river's flow, the sun's heat, the whisper of wind through the reeds. Nefret gathered the children, dressing them in their cleanest linen. She handed Menes a small basket of figs and barley cakes, their offering for the temple. Together the family joined the procession of villagers, moving slowly toward the sacred space. The priests, their heads shaved and robes spotless, greeted each family with blessings. Incense filled the air, curling in delicate tendrils toward the painted ceiling. Inside the temple the rituals began. Menes knelt with his family, bowing his head as the priests chanted prayers in a language older than memory. The children watched wide-eyed as the high priest poured libations onto the altar, invoking Ra's favor for the coming harvest. Nefret whispered a prayer for health and protection, her voice barely audible above the chorus of chants. The ceremony was elaborate, filled with symbolic gestures and sacred objects. The priests presented amulets and charms, each believed to hold the power of the gods. Menes accepted a small scarab, pressing it to his forehead in reverence. The villagers sang hymns, their voices rising in harmony, and the temple echoed with the sound of faith. After the rituals, the community gathered outside for a communal meal. Menes shared figs and barley cakes with his neighbors, exchanging stories and laughter. The children played games, chasing each other around the temple courtyard. For a few hours the burdens of sand and labor faded, replaced by the comfort of shared belief. Religion shaped every moment of Menes's life. The gods were not distant figures, but active participants in daily existence. Before planting, Menes offered a handful of seeds to Osiris. Before weaving, Nefret prayed to Isis for skill and patience. Even the smallest tasks were infused with ritual, a constant reminder of the cosmic order. As the sun climbed higher, the villagers returned to their homes carrying the blessings of the gods with them. Menes felt renewed, his spirit lifted by the power of community and faith. He knew the challenges of survival remained, the sand, the heat, the demands of the pharaoh. But he faced them with humility and hope. That evening Menes sat with his family recounting the stories of the gods. The children listened, their eyes wide with wonder. Nefret smiled, her hands busy with weaving, and Menes felt a deep sense of peace. In ancient Egypt, religion was more than belief. It was the foundation of life, the source of meaning and strength. As the stars appeared over the Nile, Menes offered a final prayer, grateful for the gods' watchful presence and the enduring rhythm of faith. The festival day had left Menes and his family with a sense of renewed hope, but the realities of life in ancient Egypt soon returned. The next morning, Menes awoke to the sound of his youngest child, Hapu, crying softly. Nefret rushed to his side, her hands gentle as she felt his forehead. Hapu's skin was hot, his breath shallow. A fever had taken hold, and worry creased Nefret's brow. In their world, illness was both a physical and spiritual battle. Menes knew that healing required more than just herbs. It demanded the favour of the gods and the skill of those who understood their mysteries. He hurried to the edge of the village, where the healer, an elderly woman named Citra, lived in a hut filled with the scent of dried flowers and pungent roots. Citra greeted Menes with a knowing look, her eyes sharp despite her age. She listened as Menes described Hapu's symptoms, nodding as she gathered bundles of herbs, mint for cooling, willow bark for pain, and a handful of blue lotus petals. She handed Menes a small clay jar filled with honey and instructed him to mix the herbs into a tea. But Citra's healing was not only practical, she believed in the power of magic and ritual. Menes returned home, where Nefret cradled Hapu in her arms. He brewed the tea as Citra had instructed, the bitter scent filling the hut. Nefret coaxed Hapu to drink, whispering prayers to Isis, goddess of healing and motherhood. Citra arrived soon after, carrying a bundle of amulets and a scroll inscribed with protective spells. She placed a scarab amulet around Hapu's neck and recited incantations, her voice low and rhythmic. The healer's methods blended the wisdom of generations with the mysteries of the divine. She examined Hapu's tongue, checked his pulse, and applied a poultice of crushed herbs to his chest. Citra explained that illness was often caused by evil spirits or the displeasure of the gods. She burned incense to purify the air and sprinkled water from the Nile around the hut, invoking the river's life-giving power. Menes watched anxiously as Citra worked, grateful for her knowledge but fearful for his son. He remembered stories of children lost to fever, of families who buried their young in the shadow of the pyramids. Nefret's eyes glistened with tears, but she remained strong, her faith in the gods unwavering. As the day wore on, Hapu's fever began to break. The herbs soothed his pain, and the amulet seemed to offer comfort. Citra stayed by his side, singing ancient hymns and telling stories of miraculous recoveries. She taught Nefret how to prepare healing salves and how to recognize the signs of illness. Menes listened, determined to remember every detail. By evening, Hapu was resting peacefully, his breathing steady. Menes and Nefret thanked Citra, offering her bread and figs in gratitude. The healer smiled, reminding them that true healing came from the gods, but that knowledge and care were gifts to be shared. That night, Menes sat outside the hut gazing at the stars. He reflected on the delicate balance between life and death, on the power of faith and the importance of wisdom. In ancient Egypt, medicine was a tapestry woven from herbs, prayers, and hope. Menes understood that survival depended not only on strength, but on the kindness and skill of those who served both the body and the spirit. As the village settled into sleep, Menes whispered a prayer of thanks to Isis and to Citra, grateful for another day with his family. The challenges of sand, sun, and labour remained, but Menes faced them with renewed courage, knowing that healing was possible even in the harshest of lands. The gentle hush of dawn found Nefret already awake, her hands busy with the day's first tasks. The fever that had gripped her younger son, Hapu, had finally broken, and the relief in her heart was tempered by the knowledge that life in ancient Egypt offered little rest for women like her. As Menes prepared to leave for the fields, Nefret wrapped her linen shawl tightly and began her own cycle of labour, a rhythm as old as the Nile itself. Nefret's day was a tapestry of endless work. She started by grinding grain, her arms straining as she turned the heavy stone mill. The bread she baked would feed her family, but the process left her palms raw and her back aching. She swept the hut, chasing sand from every corner, and fetched water from the river, balancing the heavy jar on her shoulder as she navigated the uneven path. The Nile's banks were crowded with other women, each performing the same ritual, their faces set with quiet determination. After breakfast, Nefret gathered flax from the basket and sat in the shade, spinning the fibres into thread. Her fingers moved quickly, twisting and pulling, weaving linen for tunics and shrouds. The work was repetitive, but it required skill and patience. She remembered her mother's lessons, how to judge the quality of flax, how to mend torn cloth, how to dye fabric with the colours of earth and river. The linen she produced was both a necessity and a source of pride, a testament to her resilience. The children played nearby, their laughter a brief respite from the monotony of labour. Nefret kept a watchful eye on them, pausing often to tend to their needs. She patched Hapu's tunic, soothed his lingering cough, and braided her daughter's hair. The demands of motherhood were constant, and Nefret bore them with grace, her love woven into every gesture. As the sun climbed higher, Nefret joined the other women in the fields. Together they harvested vegetables, gathered reeds for baskets, and tended to the goats and chickens. The work was communal, and the women shared stories and songs as they laboured. Nefret listened to tales of births and marriages, of hardships and small victories. The bonds between the women were strong, forged in the fires of shared struggle. Childbirth was a reality never far from Nefret's mind. She had lost friends to its dangers, and she knew that every pregnancy carried risks. The village midwife, wise and gentle, was a source of comfort, but the gods held the final say. Nefret prayed to Isis for protection, her faith a shield against fear. By evening, Nefret's energy was spent, but her tasks were not finished. She prepared the evening meal, mended torn sandals, and soothed her children to sleep. Minas returned from the fields, weary but grateful, and together they shared the quiet moments of dusk. Nefret's hands never stopped moving, her spirit never wavered. In ancient Egypt, women like Nefret were the backbone of family and community. Their rights were greater than in many lands. Nefret could own property, seek divorce, and make decisions for her household. But the daily reality was one of relentless labour and sacrifice. Nefret found strength in her skills, her faith, and the love of her family. As the stars appeared over the Nile, she closed her eyes, grateful for another day survived, and ready to face whatever challenges the morning would bring. The stars shimmered over the Nile as Menes and Nefret settled their children for the night. The gentle hush of evening a welcome reprieve from the day's relentless labour. Yet, in ancient Egypt, the shadow of death was never far, and tonight the village was preparing for a funeral, a ritual as sacred and complex as life itself. Menes's neighbour, old Paisa, had passed away after a long illness. The news spread quickly, and the community gathered to honour his journey to the afterlife. Nefret helped prepare offerings, bread, figs, and jars of beer, each symbolising sustenance for the soul's voyage. Menes joined the men in constructing a simple wooden bier, their hands working in silence, each movement guided by tradition. As dawn broke, the funeral procession began. Passa's body, wrapped in linen and adorned with amulets, was carried through the village. The priest led the way, chanting prayers to Osiris, lord of the underworld, and Anubis, guardian of souls. Incense drifted on the morning breeze, mingling with the scent of earth and river. Menes walked beside Nefret, their children clutching her hands, eyes wide with solemn curiosity. The procession wound its way to the edge of the fields where a small tomb awaited. The villagers gathered, forming a circle around the bier. The high priest recited the ancient spells from the Book of the Dead, invoking protection and guidance for Pacer's soul. Menace listened, the words both familiar and mysterious, a bridge between the living and the departed. Nefret placed offerings at the tomb's entrance, her prayers whispered for Pacer's safe passage. The children watched as the priest performed the opening of the mouth ceremony, touching sacred tools to the body so Pacer could speak, eat, and breathe in the afterlife. Menace felt the weight of history in the ritual, the sense that every gesture was part of a cosmic order. As the tomb was sealed, the villagers sang hymns, their voices rising in hope and remembrance. Menace thought of his own ancestors, buried in the shadow of the pyramids, their names preserved in faded hieroglyphs. He wondered what awaited Pacer beyond the veil, fields of reeds, eternal sunlight, or the judgment of the gods. The priest explained that Pacer's heart would be weighed against the feather of Mart, goddess of truth. If found pure, he would join the blessed dead. If not, his soul would be devoured by Amit, the fearsome eater of the unworthy. The villagers nodded, their faith in the gods unwavering, their acceptance of fate complete. After the ceremony, the community shared a meal, honouring Pacer's memory and reaffirming the bonds that held them together. Menace and Nefret comforted Pacer's widow, offering bread and kind words. The children played quietly, their laughter a gentle reminder that life continued. That night, Menace sat by the river, reflecting on the day's events. Death in ancient Egypt was not an end, but a transition, a journey through darkness and light, guided by ritual and faith. Menace felt gratitude for the wisdom of the priests, the strength of his family, and the enduring hope that the gods watched over them all. As the moon rose, Menace whispered a prayer for Pacer, for his own loved ones, and for the countless souls who had walked this path before. In the land of pyramids and gods, every life was a story, every death a passage, and every sunrise a promise of renewal. The days after Pacer's funeral were marked by a sombre quiet in the village. Menace felt the weight of mortality more keenly, and the rituals of honouring the dead lingered in his thoughts. Yet, as the sun rose and life pressed forward, another reality of ancient Egypt crept into the shadows. Tomb robbery, a desperate act born of poverty and hunger. Men's had heard whispers among the labourers in the fields. The harvest was poor, and the pharaoh's taxes had left many families with little to eat. Some spoke of the treasures buried with the dead, jars of grain, jewellery, amulets, and coins meant to sustain souls in the afterlife. The temptation was strong, especially for those who saw their children go hungry, while gold and food lay sealed in tombs just beyond reach. One evening, as Menace sat by the river, a neighbour named Seti approached him. Seti's eyes darted nervously, his voice low. "There are men who plan to enter Pacer's tomb tonight," he whispered. "They say the priest placed jars of beer and bread inside, and perhaps a few coins. My wife is ill, Menace. My children have not eaten since yesterday." Menace felt a surge of fear and pity. He knew the risks. Tomb robbery was a crime against the gods and the pharaoh, punishable by death or exile. The priest spoke of curses, of spirits who would haunt those who disturbed the dead. Yet, the desperation in Seti's voice was undeniable. Menace remembered the meagre meals his own family had endured, the constant struggle to survive. That night, Menace lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of the village. He imagined Seti and the others creeping through the fields, their footsteps muffled by sand. He pictured the tomb, its entrance hidden beneath a mound of earth. The offerings inside meant for Paza's soul. Menenius wondered if the gods truly watched, if the curses were real, or if hunger was the only force that mattered. The next morning, rumours spread quickly. The tomb had been disturbed, jars smashed, bread stolen, amulets missing. The priests were furious, their chants echoing through the village as they called for justice. The overseer questioned the men, his whip a silent threat. Seti kept his head down, his family huddled in their hut, grateful for the stolen food but terrified of retribution. Menes felt torn between compassion and fear. He understood the pain of hunger, the drive to protect one's family. Yet, he also respected the traditions that honoured the dead, the belief that disturbing a tomb brought misfortune to all. Nefret comforted him, reminding him that survival sometimes demanded impossible choices. In the days that followed, the village was tense. The priests performed rituals to cleanse the tomb, hoping to appease the spirits and lift any curses. Menenius watched as the community struggled to balance faith and necessity, the line between right and wrong blurred by desperation. As the sun set over the Nile, Menenius reflected on the fragility of life in ancient Egypt. The pyramids stood as monuments to eternity, but hunger and poverty were constant companions. Tomb robbery was not just a crime, it was a symptom of a world where survival often outweighed tradition. Menenius prayed for forgiveness, for mercy from the gods, and for a future where no family would be forced to choose between faith and food. In the quiet of night, Menenius resolved to protect his own family, to honour the dead, and to help his neighbours when he could. The challenges of sand, sun, and labour remained, but Menenius faced them with a heart shaped by compassion, hope, and the enduring struggle to do what was right in a world ruled by both gods and hunger. The tension in the village slowly eased after the priests' cleansing rituals, but the memory of the tomb robbery lingered. Menenius found himself reflecting on the power of words and symbols, especially as the priests spoke of curses and the erasure of names. In ancient Egypt, writing was more than communication. It was magic, authority, and immortality. One afternoon, Menenius was summoned to the temple to help repair a wall damaged by the recent sandstorm. As he worked, he watched a scribe named Jedhor at his task. Jedhor was a man of quiet dignity, his fingers stained with ink, his eyes sharp behind the lines of age. He sat cross-legged on a mat surrounded by papyrus scrolls and pots of black and red pigment. The scribe's reed brush danced across the surface, forming intricate hieroglyphs that seemed to pulse with life. Menenius was fascinated. He knew that only a handful in the village could read and write, and those who did were respected and sometimes feared. Jedhor explained that each symbol had meaning and power. To write a name was to grant it existence. To erase it was to condemn a soul to oblivion. The scribe showed Menenius how the priest recorded offerings, prayers, and even the deeds of the pharaoh. Every decree, every ritual, every curse was preserved in the flowing script. As Menenius mixed mud for the wall, he listened to Jedhor recount stories of the gods. The scribe spoke of Thoth, the divine inventor of writing, who kept the balance of the world with his scrolls. He described how scribes were called upon to inscribe spells on tomb walls, ensuring the dead could speak and be remembered in the afterlife. Menenius thought of Paza's tomb, of the names and prayers etched into stone, and understood why the priests had been so furious at the robbery. To steal from a tomb was to risk erasing a soul's memory. Jedhor invited Menenius to try his hand at writing. With trembling fingers, Menenius dipped the reed brush into ink and copied a simple symbol. The scarab, a sign of rebirth. The scribe smiled, encouraging him to practice. Menes felt a surge of pride and awe. The act of writing was like planting seeds in the earth, each mark a promise of growth and remembrance. The afternoon passed in quiet companionship. Giodor explained that scribes were not just record keepers but advisors, mediators, and sometimes magicians. They could sway the pharaoh's decisions, settle disputes, and invoke the gods' favour. Menes realized that knowledge was a kind of power, one that shaped the fate of families and kingdoms. As the sun set, Menes returned home, his mind alive with new possibilities. He shared what he had learned with Nefret and the children, drawing simple symbols in the sand outside their hut. The children laughed, tracing their own names, while Nefret watched with quiet pride. That night, Menes reflected on the importance of memory and legacy. In a world where sand could bury a village and hunger could drive men to desperate acts, the written word endured. It preserved stories, honoured the dead, and connected generations. Menes resolved to teach his children what little he knew, hoping that their names and their lives would be remembered long after the Nile had changed its course. In ancient Egypt, writing was more than ink on papyrus. It was the heartbeat of civilization, the bridge between mortals and gods, and the shield against oblivion. Menes understood now that survival was not just about food and shelter, but about being seen, heard, and remembered. The days passed, and Menes found himself reflecting on the world beyond his village. The stories he heard from Giodor, the scribe, lingered in his mind. Tales of distant lands, of people who lived with comforts unimaginable in ancient Egypt. Sometimes, as he watched the sun rise over the Nile, Menes wondered how someone from the future, with their strange tools and medicines, would fare in his world. One evening, as the village gathered for a communal meal, a traveller arrived. He was unlike anyone Menes had ever seen. His clothes were odd, his skin pale from lack of sun, and his manner uncertain. The villagers whispered, curious and wary. The traveller introduced himself as Thomas, claiming to come from a place far away, a time yet to come. Menes, ever hospitable, invited Thomas to share their bread and beer. Thomas struggled with the meal, grimacing at the gritty bread and cloudy beer. He asked for water, but Menes explained that the river was not safe to drink. Thomas marvelled at the simple clay cups, the communal oven, and the lack of familiar comforts. He asked about medicine, and Menes described Citra's herbs and amulets. Thomas spoke of pills and clean hospitals, but the villagers only shook their heads, unable to imagine such things. As the sun climbed higher, Menes invited Thomas to join him in the fields. Thomas wore shoes that quickly filled with sand, and he sweated profusely under the relentless sun. He tried to help with the harvest, but the wooden tools were awkward in his hands, and the overseer's stern gaze unsettled him. By midday, Thomas was exhausted, his skin reddened and raw. Menes offered him a cloth to shield his head, but Thomas missed the cool shade and gentle breezes of his own world. Nefret showed Thomas how to weave linen, her fingers deft and practiced. Thomas fumbled with the spindle, his hands unused to such labour. He marvelled at the skill required, the patience and strength of the women. He asked about rights and freedoms, and Nefret explained that, while she could own property and make decisions, her days were filled with endless work and little rest. Thomas watched the children play, their laughter echoing across the village. He saw their resilience, their ability to find joy in simple things. He asked about the gods, and Menace described the rituals, the prayers, and the belief that every action was watched by divine eyes. Thomas spoke of science and reason, but Menace smiled, knowing that faith was the foundation of their world. As evening fell, Thomas sat with Menace by the river, reflecting on his experience. He admitted that he would not last a day in ancient Egypt. The heat, the sand, the lack of comforts were overwhelming. Menace nodded, understanding that survival required more than strength. It demanded community, faith, and the ability to endure hardship. Thomas thanked Menace and Nefret for their kindness, promising to remember their stories. As he departed, Menace felt a sense of pride in his family and his village. Life in ancient Egypt was harsh, but it was also rich with meaning, shaped by tradition and hope. That night, Menace whispered a prayer for Thomas, for his own children, and for all those who struggled to survive. He knew that the world would change, but the strength of the human spirit would endure. In the land of pyramids and gods, every day was a test, and every sunset a victory. Thomas's departure left Menace with a sense of wonder and curiosity about distant lands and times. The stories of the gods and the rituals of Egypt had shaped his life, but now his imagination wandered further, across deserts and seas, to places he had only heard of in travellers' tales. One evening, as the village gathered around the fire, an elder named Khepri began to speak of a city far to the west, a place of mystery and power, Teotihuacan. Khepri's voice was low and rhythmic, drawing the villagers into his story. He described a city built not of mud brick and reeds, but of stone and fire. Teotihuacan, he said, was a place where the gods walked among men, where pyramids rose like mountains and temples shimmered with the colours of serpents and feathers. Menace listened, captivated by the vision of a world so different from his own. The heart of Teotihuacan was the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, a structure adorned with hundreds of carved serpent heads, their eyes wide and mouths open in eternal vigilance. Khepri spoke of rituals performed at the temple, ceremonies that called upon the power of the earth and sky. The priests of Teotihuacan believed that the cosmos was a delicate balance, maintained through offerings and sacrifice. Men's imagined the city as Khepri described it. Wide avenues lined with statues, markets bustling with traders from distant lands, and crowds gathered to witness the priests' rituals. The temple itself was a marvel, its walls covered in vibrant murals depicting gods, warriors, and the cycles of the sun and moon. At its centre, the feathered serpent watched over the city, a symbol of renewal and transformation. Khepri's tale grew darker as he spoke of the sacrifices required to keep the world in harmony. Menace shuddered at the thought of blood spilled on the temple steps, of lives given to appease the gods. Yet he understood the fear and reverence that shaped such acts, the belief that the fate of the city depended on the willingness of its people to offer everything to the divine. The story of Teotihuacan was not just one of power and ritual, but of mystery. Khepri explained that no one knew who ruled the city, for its leaders were hidden behind masks and silence. Some said the priests held sway, others believed in a council of elders, but all agreed that the temple was the true heart of Teotihuacan. Its influence stretched far beyond its walls, shaping the lives of those who lived in its shadow. Menace felt a kinship with the people of Teotihuacan, despite the distance and difference. Their struggles for survival, their devotion to the gods, and their search for meaning echoed his own. He wondered what it would be like to walk the avenue of the dead, to stand before the feathered serpent and offer prayers for rain, harvest, and peace. As the fire burned low, Khepri ended his tale with a warning. Even the greatest cities could fall. Teotihuacan, with all its splendor and power, was not immune to drought, famine, and unrest. Menes thought of his own village, of the challenges they faced, and understood that the rhythm of life was universal, shaped by hope, fear, and the enduring quest for balance. That night, Menes dreamed of distant pyramids and feathered serpents, of rituals that spanned continents and centuries. He awoke with a sense of wonder, grateful for the stories that connected him to a world far beyond the banks of the Nile. In the land of gods and men, every tale was a bridge, every ritual a thread in the tapestry of existence. Menes awoke from his dream of distant pyramids and feathered serpents with a sense of awe lingering in his heart. The story of Teotihuacan, as told by Khepri, had opened a window to a world both alien and familiar. As he went about his morning chores, Menes found himself pondering the mysteries of that great city, its rulers, its rituals, and the secrets hidden within its stone walls. Later that day, Menes joined a group of villagers gathered beneath the shade of a sycamore tree. Khepri, ever the storyteller, continued his tale, describing the daily life of Teotihuacan's people. Unlike the rigid hierarchy of Egypt, Teotihuacan's society was shrouded in ambiguity. No one knew the names of its rulers, for they wore elaborate masks and rarely appeared in public. Some believed the city was governed by a council of elders. Others whispered of a powerful priesthood that interpreted the will of the gods. Men's listened intently as Khepri spoke of the city's bustling markets, where traders from distant lands exchanged obsidian, cacao, and vibrant feathers. The streets were alive with artisans crafting pottery, weaving textiles, and carving intricate designs into stone. The city's architecture was a marvel. Pyramids and temples aligned with celestial bodies, wide avenues stretching toward the horizon, and murals depicting the cycles of life and death. The heart of Teotihuacan was its people, united by shared rituals and beliefs. Khepri described how the citizens gathered for festivals, their faces painted and adorned with jewelry. Music and dance filled the air, echoing through the grand plazas. Yet, beneath the surface, there was an undercurrent of tension. The city's prosperity depended on the favor of the gods, and the threat of drought or famine was ever present. Menes was struck by the absence of written records in Teotihuacan. Unlike Egypt, where scribes preserved history in hieroglyphs, Teotihuacan's secrets were kept in silence. The city's rulers communicated through symbols and ceremonies, their authority rooted in mystery. This lack of documentation only added to the city's enigmatic allure, leaving future generations to wonder about its true nature. Khepri's tale took a somber turn as he spoke of the city's decline. Years of abundance gave way to hardship, crops failed, unrest simmered, and the once great city began to unravel. Menes imagined the fear and uncertainty that must have gripped Teotihuacan's people, their prayers growing more desperate as the gods seemed to turn away. The city's rulers, hidden behind their masks, struggled to maintain order, but the forces of nature and fate proved too powerful. Despite its fall, Teotihuacan's legacy endured. Khepri explained that the ruins inspired later civilizations, who revered the city as a sacred place. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent remained a symbol of power and mystery, its influence stretching across time and space. As the sun set over the Nile, Menes reflected on the story of Teotihuacan. He saw parallels in his own life, the reliance on ritual, the importance of community, and the ever-present challenges of survival. The tale reminded him that greatness was fragile, shaped by both human ambition and the whims of the gods. That night, Menes shared Khepri's story with Nefret and the children, their imaginations ignited by visions of distant lands and lost civilizations. In the quiet darkness, Menes understood that stories were bridges, connecting people across time and space, and that the mysteries of Teotihuacan would live on as long as they were remembered. As dusk settled over the Nile, Menes and his family gathered around the fire, their minds still swirling with the mysteries of Teotihuacan. Khepri's stories had painted vivid images of the city's grandeur and its enigmatic rulers, but tonight his tale took a darker, more solemn turn. The villagers leaned in, eager to hear about the rituals that bound Teotihuacan's fate to the cosmos. Khepri spoke of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, its stone walls adorned with serpentine carvings and vibrant murals. But beneath its beauty lay a history of sacrifice, rituals performed to maintain the balance between earth, sky, and the underworld. Menes listened, both fascinated and unsettled, as Khepri described how the priest believed that the city's prosperity depended on appeasing the gods through blood offerings. The construction of the temple itself was a monumental event. Hundreds of labourers toiled under the watchful eyes of priests, their efforts guided by celestial alignments and sacred geometry. When the time came to consecrate the temple, the city's leaders called for a grand ceremony, one that would ensure Teotihuacan's place in the cosmic order. Menes imagined the crowds gathering in the plaza, their faces painted, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. Khepri's voice grew hushed as he recounted the ritual sacrifice. Selected warriors and captives were adorned with feathers and jewels, their bodies painted with symbols of the gods. They were led to the temple steps, where priests recited incantations and invoked the power of the feathered serpent. The sacrifices were not random. Each victim was chosen to represent a cosmic force, their placement within the temple's foundations mirroring the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars. Menes shuddered at the thought of such offerings, but he understood the logic behind them. In Teotihuacan, the act of sacrifice was seen as a necessary exchange, a way to ensure rain, fertility, and protection from disaster. The blood spilled on the temple stones was believed to nourish the earth and strengthen the bond between mortals and gods. As the ritual reached its climax, the priests buried the victims in symbolic patterns beneath the temple, their bodies aligned with the cardinal directions and celestial markers. The city watched in silence, aware that their fate was now intertwined with the sacrifices made. Khepri explained that these ceremonies were both political and spiritual, reinforcing the authority of the rulers and reminding the people of their place in the universe. Menes reflected on the differences between his own world and that of Teotihuacan. In Egypt, rituals were performed to honor the gods and ensure the afterlife, but rarely did they demand such extreme offerings. Yet, he saw parallels in the way both societies sought to maintain balance and order, their actions shaped by faith and fear. As the fire burned low, Khepri concluded his tale with a reminder that the legacy of Teotihuacan's sacrifices endured long after the city's decline. Archaeologists would one day uncover the remains of those buried beneath the temple, their stories etched in bone and stone. Menes felt a deep sense of connection to these distant people, their struggles and hopes echoing across time. That night, as Menes drifted into sleep, He dreamed of temples and stars, of rituals that bound the fate of cities to the rhythms of the cosmos. He awoke with a renewed understanding of the power of belief and the lengths to which people would go to secure their place in the world. In the land of pyramids and serpents, every sacrifice was a prayer, every ritual a thread in the tapestry of existence. The fire's embers glowed softly as Khepri's tale of Teotihuacan's ritual sacrifices faded into the night. Menes and his family sat in thoughtful silence, the weight of distant history settling over them. Yet, Khepri was not finished. He leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the flickering light, and began to recount the spectacle of public ceremonies at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, events that shaped the city's destiny and the hearts of its people. In Teotihuacan, ritual was not confined to the shadows. It was a grand display, a theatre of power and faith that unfolded before thousands. Menes imagined the city's central plaza, filled with citizens from every walk of life, farmers, artisans, traders, and priests, all gathered to witness the rulers and their priests enact the will of the gods. The air buzzed with anticipation, drums and flutes echoing off the stone facades, banners fluttering in the wind. At the heart of these ceremonies stood the city's leaders, masked and robed in dazzling colours. Their presence was both awe-inspiring and intimidating, their movements choreographed to project divine authority. Menes pictured the high priest ascending the temple steps, arms raised to the sky, invoking the feathered serpent's blessing. The crowd responded with reverent silence, every eye fixed on the unfolding drama. The rituals were elaborate, blending music, dance, and symbolic gestures. Priests carried sacred objects, obsidian blades, feathered staffs, and painted shields, each representing a cosmic force. The ceremony's climax often involved the presentation of offerings, baskets of maize, precious stones, and at times the blood of sacrificial victims. These acts were not hidden. They were performed in full view, reinforcing the ruler's power and the city's dependence on divine favour. Menes felt the tension in Khepri's words as he described how these public displays served a dual purpose. They honoured the gods, but they also reminded the people of their place in the social order. The rulers, shrouded in mystery and ritual, appeared almost superhuman, untouchable, chosen by the gods to guide the city's fate. The ceremonies instilled both awe and fear, binding the citizens to their leaders through spectacle and belief. Yet, beneath the grandeur, there was unease. Menes understood that such displays could mask uncertainty and unrest. The ruler's authority depended on the people's faith, and the rituals were as much about maintaining control as they were about cosmic balance. Khepri spoke of times when the ceremonies grew more intense, when drought or famine threatened the city, and the priest called for greater sacrifices. The plaza would fill with anxious faces, each person searching for reassurance in the priest's words and actions. Menes saw parallels in his own world. The pharaoh's public rituals, the priest's processions, the way authority was woven into the fabric of daily life. He realized that power was not just enforced by decree, but by spectacle and shared belief. The people of Teotihuacan, like those of Egypt, found meaning and security in the rhythms of ritual, even as they feared the consequences of divine displeasure. As the fire died down, Menes thanked Khepri for his stories. He felt a deeper understanding of the forces that shaped civilizations, the delicate balance between faith, fear, and authority. That night, as he drifted into sleep, Menes dreamed of plazas filled with music and colour, of rulers masked in mystery, and of the enduring power of ritual to unite and command. In the land of pyramids and feathered serpents, every ceremony was a performance, every gesture a message, and every citizen a participant in the grand theatre of survival and belief. The stories of Teotihuacan's grand ceremonies and masked rulers lingered in Menes's mind, weaving themselves into the fabric of his own experiences. As the days passed, Khepri's tales shifted from the city's glory to its decline, a lesson that resonated deeply with Menes and his village, who knew well the fragility of prosperity. Khepri described how Teotihuacan, once a beacon of power and culture, began to falter. The rains grew unpredictable, and the river that had sustained the city's fields shrank under the relentless sun. Crops failed, and hunger gnawed at the edges of daily life. Menes listened, recognizing the same fears that haunted his own people when the Nile's floods were late or too meagre. Unrest simmered beneath the surface of Teotihuacan. The rituals that once united the city now became sources of tension. Some citizens questioned the priest's authority, wondering if the gods had turned away. The rulers, hidden behind their masks, responded with more elaborate ceremonies and greater demands for sacrifice, hoping to restore balance and faith. But the people's patience wore thin, and whispers of rebellion spread through the markets and alleys. Men's imagined the city's decline as Khepri spoke. The grand avenues, once filled with music and colour, now echoed with the sounds of protest and sorrow. Families abandoned their homes, seeking refuge in distant villages. The temples, once vibrant with offerings, stood silent and empty. The feathered serpent watched over a city unravelling, its stone gaze unblinking as the world changed around it. One night, Khepri recounted the final days of Teotihuacan. A great fire swept through the city, consuming homes and temples alike. The rulers vanished, their masks left behind as mute witnesses to the chaos. The surviving citizens scattered, carrying with them memories of a lost civilization. Menes felt a pang of sadness, understanding that even the greatest cities could fall to the forces of nature and human strife. Yet Teotihuacan's legacy endured. Khepri explained that the ruins became sacred ground for those who came after. The Aztecs, arriving centuries later, revered the city as the birthplace of the gods. They built their own temples atop the old stones, honouring the feathered serpent and the spirits of the past. The rhythms of ritual and belief continued, echoing through time. Menes reflected on the lessons of Teotihuacan's collapse. He saw the importance of resilience, of adapting to change and finding hope in the face of adversity. He shared these thoughts with Nefret and the children, reminding them that their own village too depended on the strength of its people and the wisdom to learn from the past. As the stars appeared over the Nile, Menes felt a sense of connection to those who had walked the avenues of Teotihuacan, who had built and lost, hoped and mourned. He understood that every civilization was a story, shaped by triumph and tragedy, by the choices of rulers and the courage of ordinary people. That night, Menes dreamed of ruins and rebirth, of cities rising and falling beneath the watchful eyes of gods and ancestors. He awoke with gratitude for the stories that linked his world to others, and for the enduring spirit that carried people forward, even when the fires of change swept through their lives. The tale of Teotihuacan's decline and the resilience of its people lingered in Menes's thoughts, inspiring him to reflect on how the past is uncovered and remembered. One evening, As the village gathered by the Nile, Khepri began a new story, this time not of ancient priests or masked rulers, but of those who came centuries later to unravel the mysteries buried beneath the stones. Khepri spoke of the modern seekers, archaeologists and explorers who arrived at the ruins of Teotihuacan, driven by curiosity and reverence. Menes imagined these strangers, their clothes and tools unlike anything he knew, carefully brushing away centuries of dust to reveal tunnels hidden deep beneath the temple of the feathered serpent. The villagers listened in awe as Khepri described how these explorers mapped the labyrinthine passages, their lanterns casting flickering shadows on walls adorned with faded murals and enigmatic symbols. Within the tunnels, the archaeologists discovered pools of liquid mercury, shimmering in the darkness like the tears of forgotten gods. Menes marveled at the idea of such a substance, its purpose lost to time. Some believed it represented the underworld, a river for the spirits of the dead to cross. Others thought it was a sign of the city's technological prowess, a secret known only to the priests and rulers of Teotihuacan. Khepri described the treasures unearthed, thousands of ritual objects from obsidian blades to jade masks, each telling a fragment of the city's story. The explorers found offerings arranged in intricate patterns, evidence of ceremonies meant to honor the gods and secure cosmic balance. Menes pictured the delicate hands that once placed these objects, the prayers whispered in the darkness, the hope that the gods would hear and respond. The villagers were captivated by the idea that the past could be revealed through patient effort and respect. Menes saw parallels in his own life, in the way stories and traditions were passed down, each generation adding its own layer to the tapestry of memory. He understood that the work of the archaeologists was not just about discovery, but about honoring those who came before, giving voice to the silent stones and forgotten rituals. Khepri explained that the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl remained a powerful symbol in Mexican culture, his image woven into festivals, art and identity. The legacy of Teotihuacan lived on, not just in ruins and relics, but in the hearts and minds of those who remembered and celebrated its mysteries. Menes felt a kinship with these distant people, their reverence for the past echoing his own respect for the gods and ancestors. As the story ended, Menes gazed at the stars, imagining the explorers beneath the temple, their discoveries illuminating the darkness. He realized that every civilization leaves traces, objects, stories, and beliefs that shape the future. The work of remembering and understanding is never finished. It is a journey that connects all people across time and space. That night, Menes shared Khepri's tale with Nefret and the children, encouraging them to cherish their own history and to seek knowledge with humility and wonder. In the quiet of their hut, Menes reflected on the power of memory, the importance of honoring the past, and the hope that, one day, others would uncover and celebrate the stories of his own village. In the land of pyramids and serpents, every discovery was a bridge between worlds, every artifact a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. The night was quiet along the banks of the Nile, the stars reflected in the gentle ripples of the river. Menes sat with his family, the stories of distant lands and ancient mysteries still fresh in their minds. Khepri's tales of Teotihuacan and the explorers who unearthed its secrets had sparked a new curiosity in Menes, a yearning to understand how the rhythms of the past shaped the present and the future. As the fire dwindled, Menes began to drum softly on an overturned clay pot, the steady beat echoing through the darkness. His children joined in, clapping their hands and tapping sticks against the ground. The simple rhythm grew, weaving together the voices of the family and the sounds of the night. Menes realized that this act, making music, sharing stories, was a thread that connected him to generations before and those yet to come. Khepri smiled, watching the family's impromptu celebration. He spoke of how rhythm and music had always been at the heart of human identity, from the earliest gatherings around fires to the grand ceremonies in temples and plazas. Menes imagined the drums of Teotihuacan, the chants of Egyptian priests, and the songs of travelers crossing deserts and seas. Each beat was a memory, a hope, a promise. As the night deepened, Khepri's stories shifted to the world beyond the village. He described a place called Manhattan, a city of millions where the sky was not the limit but the next floor. Menes listened in wonder as Khepri painted a picture of towering buildings made of steel and glass, rising higher and higher, reflecting the dreams and ambitions of countless people. The skyline, Khepri explained, was like a modern pyramid, built not for gods, but for the aspirations of humanity. Men saw the connection between the ancient and the modern. The rhythms of drums and the rhythms of construction were both expressions of hope and resilience. Just as the people of Teotihuacan and Egypt built temples and pyramids to honor their gods and mark their place in the world, the people of Manhattan built upward, reaching for new heights and new possibilities. Khepri spoke of how the city's skyline had changed over time, shaped by booms and busts, wars and wounds. Each building was a story, each floor a testament to the struggles and triumphs of those who came before. Menes imagined the workers who laid the foundations, the architects who dreamed of the sky, and the families who found shelter and community in the shadows of the towers. The story of Manhattan was not just about ambition, but about resilience, the ability to rise again after tragedy, to rebuild and remember. Menes thought of his own village, of the challenges they faced and the hope that sustained them. He understood that the rhythm of life was universal, echoing from the banks of the Nile to the avenues of distant cities. As dawn approached, Menes felt a sense of peace. He knew that his family's stories, songs, and struggles were part of a larger tapestry, woven together by the rhythms of history and the dreams of generations. The skyline of Manhattan, the pyramids of Egypt, and the ruins of Teotihuacan were all markers of humanity's journey, reminders that the sky was never the limit, but always the next floor. Menes embraced his children, grateful for the stories that connected them to the past and the future. In the quiet of the morning, he whispered a prayer for resilience, for hope, and for the enduring rhythm that carried people forward, no matter where they called home.